Hi everyone, thanks for taking a few minutes today to tune in and watch this video. Before we get started, I want to provide a disclaimer to the audience. This video is going to include some graphic descriptions and reenactments of injuries suffered by a murder victim prior to their death. Therefore, I want to give the audience a trigger warning and let you know that this video is not appropriate for young children. My name is Bucholtz. I am a professor of forensics and criminal justice. I'm a licensed private investigator and an Army veteran. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the injuries suffered by murder victim Rebekah Gould. Rebekah was murdered in 2004 inside the home of her then boyfriend Casey McCullough. His house was located in the small town of Melbourne, Arkansas. For viewers who are not familiar with Rebekah's case, there's several places you can go to get a good overview and background. One of those is to look up the podcast In Public Safety Matters. This 5-part series was co-produced by myself and my employer, American Military University. Additionally, you can tune in to Season 1 of the Hell and Gone podcast with Catherine Townsend, Murder Squad with Billy Jensen and Paul Holes, and Diamond State Murder Board, hosted by investigative journalist George Jared and Andrew Brown. In fact, today's video is going to be released in conjunction with episode 13 of Diamond State Murder Board, where George, myself, and Andrew discuss Rebekah's murder and her injuries in great detail. This video is meant to go along with that discussion to provide a visual aid for viewers and listeners. Today, for demonstration purposes, I've got an anatomically correct skull. Please ignore the missing bottom tooth. I recently moved, my skull lost its tooth, and I still have yet to find it. But the missing tooth has nothing to do with Rebekah's murder. In fact, all of her teeth were intact when found, and there was no injury to that part of her jaw. So please ignore that. I want to provide a caveat that I only have the written autopsy report from Rebekah's case. We were never provided the x-rays or photographs of her skull. So I have to operate 100% off of that written autopsy report. However, it's pretty detailed and it appears accurate. But based on that report, Rebekah suffered 2 separate and distinct areas of injury to her skull. And these injuries were incurred or produced by an unknown object that was used to hit her. So one area of injury was to her nasal structure in the front, and then the second area of injury was to the left side of her skull. And we're mostly going to focus on this front area of injury today because it provides us the most insight into what happened. So according to the autopsy report, this upper left piece of Rebekah's nasal structure here, this bone here, was shattered and broken. Also, this middle piece in the back was broken. And then this lower right portion of her nasal structure was also broken. And so what this does when we connect the lines, or the dots, between those 3 areas, is it provides us a line. And it provides us that angle of injury, which you can see is from her upper left to her lower right. Also, for demonstration purposes today, I have what's called a tire checker. This is an 18-inch tire checker, or sometimes called a tire thumper, that is used by drivers of semi-trucks to ensure that their tires are properly inflated. They use the tire checker to thump against each tire, and then they can tell by the sound whether their tire is properly inflated or not. This is just one object that is consistent with Rebekah's injuries, and I'm not saying that a tire checker was used to inflict the injuries against her. I'm just saying that this object is consistent with the description of her injuries. But there are many other objects that are consistent as well, and we still have yet to know exactly what object was used to hit her. So again, placing the tire checker on that angle of injury shows again the upper left to the lower right injury. And as I back up, you can see where my hand is. Unfortunately, with my left arm, I have to hold the skull. But with my right hand, you can see where that hand ends up as the weapon connects with her nasal structure. So this in turn tells us that her killer was almost certainly right-handed, or at least right-hand dominant. And I'll show you why. If I hold this in my left hand and swing it, I get a horizontal angle. And this is not at all consistent with Rebekah's injuries. But if I hold it in my right hand and swing it, we get the exact angle of injury that we saw across her nose. Now, she was also hit straight on. We know this because there was no damage to her left eye socket up here, and there was no damage to her lower right cheek or jaw. So the weapon had to connect with her nose, essentially straight on. Now, most people who see an object being swung at them will put their arms up in defense in an attempt to thwart that attack or to defend themselves against being hit and avoid being hit. We know Rebekah, for whatever reason, didn't have the opportunity to do that because, number one, there was no evidence of defensive wounds, and number two, we do know that her nasal structure was completely shattered. The only way we've been able to recreate that injury to her nasal structure is by discussing a scenario as follows. She's probably facing whoever hit her, engages in an argument which escalates. She then may have turned to walk away. Whoever hit her picked up the blunt object and went after her, intending to hit her in the back of the head. But as they went after her, Rebekah probably heard something and turned her head 90 degrees to the right as the person who hit her swung that weapon for the first time. That is the only way we've been able to accurately recreate that injury to her nasal structure. And if this is correct, that tells us that Rebekah turned her back on whoever hit her. To remind viewers, the injury to Rebekah's nose ran from the upper left to the lower right. There was no damage to her left eye socket, and there was no damage to her right cheekbone or lower right jaw. This here shows the position that the weapon would have been in when it struck her in the nose. It also shows relatively where the hand of the person who hit her would have been as that weapon connected with her nasal structure. We tried various ways, swinging from the very front, to replicate Rebekah's injuries, and we were unable to do so. Not to mention, if someone is facing a person swinging an object at them, they are going to put their hands up and try to deflect that blow. From what we can tell, Rebekah had no defensive injuries, no bone bruising to her forearms. It would appear that she was hit and she had no forewarning. So if we turn 90 degrees to the person who's swinging the weapon, you're still able to deflect that blow out of your peripheral. And just to show that her being turned to her right, 90 degrees to the right from her killer, is also not consistent with her injury to her nose. But if I turn 180 degrees with my back to the killer, and I'm taken by surprise or caught off guard, and I turn my head to the right, the angle of injury is 100% consistent with that angle of injury that was at Rebekah's nose.